Most people know Henry VIII as the English king with 6 unfortunate wives. That much is true. But what most history books don't reveal is just how grotesque, paranoid, and physically decayed this monarch became. Behind the royal portraits and polished lineage lies a horror story, one of rot, pain, cruelty, and madness. The kind of story that would be too unbelievable if it weren't so thoroughly documented. This isn't just about palace intrigue. It's about the collapse of a man from within, body, mind, and soul. Henry VIII didn't just rule with an iron fist, he governed through fear, manipulation, and increasingly unhinged decisions that turned his court into a twisted theater of control. His reign was marked not only by the English Reformation or his bloody marital history, but by his physical degeneration and psychological descent. What happens when a king becomes a prisoner of his own body? When infection eats at the flesh while ambition corrodes the mind? What kind of monarch has to be wheeled into battle and leaves his doctors retching from the stench of his wounds? And perhaps most disturbing of all, what happens when that kind of man still holds absolute power? Today we pull back the velvet curtain to expose the dark, rancid truth behind one of history's most infamous rulers. From suppurating leg ulcers to marital terror, from gluttonous feasts to posthumous horror, this is the monstrous reign of Henry VIII. You won't look at British royalty the same way again. A body in ruin. At the end of his life, Henry VIII was almost unrecognizable from the athletic young man who once dazzled Europe. The transformation was staggering. He ballooned to over 400 pounds, with a waist exceeding 54 inches. No longer able to walk without assistance, he was hoisted onto his horse with a system of pulleys. His once muscular frame was reduced to a bloated, immobile mass of infection and pain. One of the most gruesome aspects of Henry's condition was his leg ulcers. The sores were deep, festering, and emitted a smell so revolting that courtiers reportedly avoided standing downwind. His doctors struggled to keep the wounds from reopening. When they did, the pus and decay would soak through the bandages and into his garments, often staining the throne itself. The smell was said to linger long after he left the room. Servants dreaded attending to him. Some reportedly fainted from the odor. Others wept while changing his bandages. His moods, already darkening from paranoia, grew even worse as the pain increased. He became volatile, lashing out unpredictably. Any perceived insult could be a death sentence. Historians speculate that much of this decline may have stemmed from a severe jousting accident in 1536. Henry was knocked unconscious for 2 hours and never fully recovered. Some believe the head trauma triggered the onset of Cushing's syndrome, or a form of hydrocephalus, leading to rapid weight gain, mood swings, cognitive decline, and uncontrollable rage. It may have also affected his endocrine system, explaining his infertility and manic episodes. But the most terrifying result of his injuries wasn't just physical. His grasp on reality began to weaken. He was racked with hallucinations, sudden bursts of aggression, and a distorted sense of divine destiny. He believed he was chosen by God, and anyone who challenged him wasn't just defying the crown, but the heavens. The once charming king had become a monster in silk. The wives, tragedy and terror. Henry's 6 wives weren't just romantic misadventures. They were casualties in a game of psychological warfare. Each woman bore witness to the unpredictable wrath of a man who could turn from devoted to deadly in a matter of weeks. Anne Boleyn, perhaps the most infamous, was manipulated from the start. She resisted him for years before finally giving in. But once she failed to produce a male heir, Henry's love curdled into suspicion. She was imprisoned, accused of incest and adultery, and forced to watch her alleged lovers executed before her own beheading. Catherine Howard was just a teenager, barely 15, when she caught Henry's eye. He was nearing 50, obese, and in constant pain. He rewrote the laws of England to allow for her execution when rumors of her past romances emerged. She was dragged screaming from her chambers, begging for mercy. None came. Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, was cast aside after decades of loyalty. Forbidden from seeing her daughter Mary, she died alone, isolated and heartbroken, banished like a criminal, even though she had committed no crime. Anne of Cleves might have been the luckiest. Henry found her physically repulsive and annulled the marriage quickly. She played along, praising him and accepting a generous settlement. It was a calculated escape, one of the few who managed to survive his rule. Jane Seymour gave him a son, but died in childbirth. Henry mourned her briefly before moving on. Her death, while tragic, was perhaps the only one not marked by violence or betrayal. Each of these women was a pawn in Henry's campaign to secure his legacy. Marriage wasn't about companionship. It was about power, image, and control. For those who displeased him, the consequences were lethal. Marriage under Henry VIII was often a death sentence, eating like a tyrant. Henry's appetite was as legendary as his temper. He consumed more than 5,000 calories a day, often in a single sitting. His meals were royal feasts, laden with roasted swan, whole-suckling pigs, deer, and an endless array of pies, pastries, and wines. Each food had symbolic meaning. Swans represented purity. Deer symbolized nobility and skill in hunting. Every plate told a story of status and grandeur. Even fruit was curated to reflect sophistication. Figs, dates, and imported citrus fruits were reserved for him alone. Feeding Henry required an army. Over 200 staff members were dedicated to the preparation, procurement, and protection of his meals. The kitchens operated like a small city, with bakers, brewers, butchers, and stewards all working under strict guidelines. He was obsessed with the idea of poison. Every dish was tasted before reaching him. Silverware was inspected for tampering. Wait times between courses weren't for digestion. They were to allow for any poisoning effects to become apparent in others before he took a bite. He banned common foods like onions, garlic, and coarse bread from his table, declaring them peasant fare. Even the smell of them was offensive to his royal sensibilities. His table was a symbol of separation, of divine elevation above the common man. Food was more than sustenance for Henry. It was an extension of his ego, a way to remind everyone that he was not merely a king, but something greater, something untouchable, at least in his own mind. A kingdom of paranoia. As Henry's body deteriorated, so did his trust in everyone around him. The court became a haunted place, shrouded in suspicion, betrayal, and the constant fear of execution. Paranoia ruled from the throne, infecting every corner of the kingdom. Henry slept with weapons within arm's reach, daggers, pistols, and swords lining the wall behind his bed. His private chambers were rigged with trap doors, hidden passages, and narrow peepholes so he could spy on anyone, even his most trusted advisors. No one was above suspicion, not even his family. He employed spies to monitor his courtiers, but he also hired spies to watch the spies. Reports flowed into his chambers daily, sometimes based on little more than whispers or sideways glances. One poorly chosen word, one jest misinterpreted, could mean arrest, or worse. Dreams were enough to condemn a man. One courtier was executed because Henry's astrologer claimed he had dreamed of the king's death. Others vanished without explanation, their names scratched from records, their families shunned. Even his own daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, were not safe. Henry alternated between lavishing them with gifts and publicly disowning them. Both were declared illegitimate at different points, depending on the status of their mothers or Henry's mood. He viewed their very existence as a potential threat to his throne. His inner circle was a revolving door of favor and fear. Thomas More, once his closest friend, was executed for refusing to accept Henry's supremacy over the church. Thomas Cromwell, who orchestrated much of Henry's religious reform, was beheaded when a political marriage went sour. Loyalty offered no protection. The court became a theater of psychological torture. Nobles wore fake smiles and spoke in riddles, terrified of being overheard. Even celebrations were tense affairs, lavish on the surface but loaded with unspoken dread. Every laugh was calculated, every toast a potential trap. This was not a kingdom, it was a cage, and Henry held the key. Death and decay. By the end, Henry was more corpse than king. He couldn't walk, couldn't ride, and often couldn't even stand. His body was breaking down in real time. His legs so swollen they had to be lanced to release pressure. His ulcerated wounds refused to heal. His skin began sloughing off in patches. His courtiers had to endure his company out of obligation, though some were said to vomit from the overwhelming stench. One ambassador wrote that Henry's presence was barely endurable. The air in his chambers was thick with rot, perfume, and barely masked disgust. As he lay dying, doctors were unsure what to do. They couldn't announce his impending death. Treason laws forbade it. They were afraid to treat him aggressively in case he recovered and punished them. So they waited and watched, and then he died. But even death couldn't silence the grotesque theater of his reign. His massive corpse was placed in an ornate coffin, sealed with difficulty. As it made its way to Windsor for burial, the unimaginable happened. The coffin ruptured. The gases from decomposition caused the wood to split. The corpse began to leak. Dogs were seen licking the trail of bodily fluids left behind. Legend says a workman quoted a biblical passage as it happened, "And dogs shall lick his blood." Whether apocryphal or not, the image stuck. Even in death, Henry VIII was impossible to contain. Later reports from Windsor describe strange noises in the chapel, unexplained illnesses among clergy, and a foul stench that never seemed to leave his gravesite. Some claimed his ghost lingered, restless and swollen with unfulfilled vengeance. His tomb remains, grand and dignified in appearance. But beneath the marble and Latin inscriptions lies a man who died rotting from the inside out, physically, morally, and historically. History has a way of softening its villains. We remember Henry VIII as a portly king with marital troubles and a flair for drama. But the truth is far more disturbing. He wasn't just a tyrant. He was a decaying man in silk robes, wielding godlike power while slipping further into madness. His reign was not one of noble legacy, but of bloated ego, festering wounds and trails of blood. Emotional, physical, and depolitical. His body mirrored his rule, inflamed, swollen, toxic, and uncontainable. The monarchy survived him, but it never forgot him. The laws he rewrote, the wives he destroyed, the paranoia he nurtured. They left scars that would ripple through English history for generations. Henry VIII wasn't just a cautionary tale of gluttony or lust. He was a living nightmare of unchecked authority, of what happens when a man loses touch with pain, consequence, and reality. Power did not elevate him. It corrupted him. And in that corruption, we find the real lesson. Not all monsters hide in the shadows. Some sit on thrones, rotting from the inside, dressed in velvet, demanding loyalty, while the kingdom holds its breath. If you thought the Tudors were all drama and dresses, think again. Subscribe to History Driven for more disturbing, unbelievable, and absolutely true royal horrors from the past.